DNA of Islam. The authorities of the faith say it is one and the same as Islam. About 10%, by some estimates, has to do with pietistic practice. How you pray, in which direction you pray, what you wash, what you eat, what you don't eat, and so on. That's not the problem. The problem is with the rest of it. And when you understand it properly, that veneer comes off pretty quickly, and it's the power piece that is the problem. Fortunately, some Muslims, like Zuhdi Jasser, he is, I think, hands down the most prominent of them, who have said, I don't agree with this Sharia business. But most, unfortunately, do. And the ones that do understand that what Sharia requires of them as a faithful Muslim is that they must impose Sharia on everybody else. Yeah. Muslim as well as non-Muslim. Here's the key piece, and I say this, frankly, early on in this presentation. If you get this, everything else is great. If you don't get this, you've wasted your morning. If we understand that basically this doctrine of Sharia is not a religious program, it is a political, military, legal ideology that is totalitarian in character and fundamentally anti-constitutional, then we're going to be okay, because we have laws on the books that allow us to resist such things. If, on the other hand, we're going to succumb to what we are endlessly told by adherents to Sharia, or even just apologists for it, then we must consider it a religious practice. And under our Constitution, it is protected. Well then, basically we're toast. Because we will spend our time and our energies protecting something that ultimately will destroy us from within. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how that works. Bill's introduced this phenomenon of the hijra, that migration that Muhammad originally made from Mecca to Medina, with disastrous results for all involved. Well, again, as the perfect man, the model of how a Muslim is supposed to behave, making the hijra, making the migration for the purpose of spreading the faith, is one of the things that is expected of the faithful. You also have this phenomenon of sort of a demographic jihad, simply trying to outbreed a native population in a land that is not already Muslim. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this last piece, something that the Muslim Brotherhood has called civilization jihad. I'm so glad that Bill introduced you to the Muslim Brotherhood. This is an extraordinarily important document. I'm not as prepared as Bill is to share this with you here, but you can go online at securefreedom.org and you can read this as a downloadable PDF. This document, I would argue, is of surpassing importance. It's called the Explanatory Memorandum on the General Strategic Goal of the Group in North America. That's not terribly pithy, is it? But we'll just call it the Explanatory Memorandum for shorthand. What it is, though, is the secret plan written by a top Muslim Brotherhood operative by the name of Muhammad Akram back in 1991, a long time ago. It wasn't meant for our eyes. We weren't supposed to ever see this. This was meant for the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood back in the mothership in Egypt. And it was describing what had been accomplished by the brothers already first 25 or so years of their operations in the United States, as well as offering a strategic plan for what they were going to do. In the words of the author of this document, what really is the distilled essence of the mission of the Muslim Brotherhood in our country. Quote, destroying Western civilization from within by their hands, meaning us, and the hands of the believers, so that Allah's religion is victorious over all other religions. Unquote. I'll just tell you a quick story about how we came upon this thing. As I said, it wasn't meant for our eyes. It was an act of divine providence. In 2004, 23 years after this thing was written, an alert Maryland Transportation Authority police officer on an important artery out in my neck of the woods called the Chesapeake Bay Bridge was monitoring the traffic and observed that something unusual was taking place. It's not unusual for people driving over this bridge. I don't know how many of you have been on it. It's beautiful, but it goes out over the entire Chesapeake Bay, and you see at the apex this extraordinary seascape. Well, people pull out phones and take pictures of it. Only what the police officer observed was this couple in one car. The woman in the passenger seat was taking pictures, all right, only she was taking pictures of the structural supports of the bridge, which, being a trained law enforcement professional, he thought might not be a good thing. So he pulled them over, ran their IDs, and discovered that the man driving the car, her husband, a fellow by the name of Ismail El Barassa, was wanted on a material witness arrest warrant out of Chicago in connection with fundraising for a designated terrorist group called Hamas. When word got out on that, the FBI sprung into action and went and visited their home in a suburban neighborhood outside Washington, D.C., not far from where I live, as a matter of fact, Annandale, Virginia. And in this unprepossessing sort of suburban rambler, they discovered 80 banker boxes filled with documents that turned out, on inspection and translation, to be the archives of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. Ladies and gentlemen, there is zero chance we would have tumbled onto those under other circumstances, I think. But lo and behold, we did. And in that compendium of materials was this document. And it was introduced into evidence in the largest terrorism financing trial in U.S. history, the Holy Land Foundation trial in Dallas, Texas, back in 2008, and used to convict people who were also fundraising for that designated terrorist group, Hamas. Now, what's so important about this is that this plan is being faithfully pursued by not only the Brotherhood here on the left, on the right, rather, but also by this Organization of Islamic Cooperation that Bill did a great job introducing you to. Most people are completely unaware this thing exists, but it is, by many people's thinking, the caliphate in the making, 57 Muslim majority nations. And what they're trying to do, as Bill very helpfully described, as the leading edge of the civilization jihad, is to silence people like us, so that people like you won't know it's afoot. And it sounds There's a reason, doesn't it? If you're running a stealthy subversion operation designed to destroy a country like ours from within, it's infinitely easier and more likely to succeed if the people you're trying to subvert and force into submission, which is, you may remember, is the literal meaning of the word Islam, don't know what you're doing. So if you can get some help from people like these in suppressing information about this, all the better. You can basically seize the initiative. And to the extent that people who are pointing this kind of information out to you either are called by the Southern Poverty Law Center racists and haters and bigots and Islamophobes, and the distinction of having been called all of those things by the SBS. Or these other platforms will, at the direction of the Southern Poverty Law Center, prohibit material that we produce from being made available to you, or maybe just made harder to find. Well, it helps, again, keeping you in the dark and ensuring that the people who represent you are disinclined to take this issue on, which is a very important ingredient of this civilization or stealthy jihad. They're going after as well people like these. Some of these are obviously household names. President, his National Security Advisor, John Bolton, his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. This gentleman you may not know is a former colleague of mine at the Center for Security Policy, now John Bolton's Chief of Staff. These people have all been vilified as haters, racists, bigots, Islamophobes. And fortunately, despite all of that, they still are at work doing what can be done, and unfortunately only a part of what needs to be done, but doing what needs to be done to begin countering this threat. I want to talk to you about that a little bit more. In Europe, I think this is an encouraging chart. People have begun awakening to this problem. Nothing like having a couple of million people deposited on your shores who are increasingly aggressively, not of this stealth jihad so much, it's now moved into that next phase, as Bill talked about, where it becomes more aggressive. Remember, we talked about Muhammad being the man of faith, the religious leader, turning into the political leader, en route to becoming the military leader. Well, we're in phase 2, I would argue, in Europe. And some people, including the new chancellor there, are getting elected on a platform of standing up to this. It's still early days, I have to tell you, and it's going to be a near-run thing if they can pull it off, because some of these countries in Europe, as Bill has indicated, are pretty far down the tubes. Think about this, in France, where, as I think he said, the boy's name Muhammad is the most popular name in the country for newborns. Something like 12% of the population is now Muslim. And that may seem like not very much because there's all those other people who aren't, but the degree to which this is an unassimilable and increasingly aggressively Sharia supremacist population in their midst has a disproportionate effect. I mean, think about this. We don't have quite the same electoral system they do there. They have a parliamentary system. And as a result, the effects of that population are even more pronounced than they are in, say, a two-party system like ours. You have people who are able to become the kingmakers, in effect, even though they've got a relatively small number of votes. If they're able to use those